I want you to do a perceptual map using attributes that the two of you determine are important. Okay? Create the attributes that you want, vertical and horizontal. And just using those 4 brands, try and place them on that chart. And prepare a short 6-slide presentation on that.
So we kind of thought that Starbucks and Odyssey are more of a comparable coffee shops, and then Tim Hortons and Second Cup are kind of similar.
So when you see Second Cup and Tim's over there occupying their own quadrants, at least in this space, is that something you can look at and say there's weakness there, or?
The demographic, because this is a unisex hoodie, is female and male, students and teachers, so the age range from 18 to 45.
Like if you could eliminate geographic, for instance, I mean, it's hardly of any material value to them. Even demographics probably the same.
Yeah, and I like how there's like, when we went onto MindTap, the video was first, so you're visualizing it, you're listening to it, and then there was reading after, so it was almost like a backup kind of thing. If you missed something, you could go back and read it, but even the readings were short, and there was an option. My big thing is that there was an option for it to talk to you. It spoke what the text was. Yeah, and I personally really like that, because then I can sit here and I can take notes instead of jumping back into the text trying to find it to get it in my notepad. I like to multitask when I'm trying to learn, so that was really helpful.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Did either of you notice the read speak function?
I did.
Is that something that you would use?
Yeah, it is. Especially if, like, this course not as much, but if there's a course that you're learning a lot of language in the course,
Yeah.
Like
sometimes,
Yeah.
then there's often even it just comes down to how to pronounce the word, or there's a word you may not recognize in writing, but then as soon as you hear it, you know the meaning of it, and that almost takes a step out of getting distracted. What does that word mean? And then for the next 2 sentences, not actually really paying attention to what you're taking in, because it's making a lot more sense because it's verbal as well as visual.
Interesting. Did you find that as well? Did you?
Oh yeah, I find that very helpful too. The same example as well, just like going back to the notes, because I'm personally, when I watch a video or I listen to instructors, I like to take notes. Really like reading the whole chapter and being always prepared is a challenge, I find personally. So learning those activities or like doing these hands-on exercises in class are very helpful, because you learn better while you're doing it. You can read many definitions, maybe you can memorize and know them all by heart, but you know that the outcome is so much better when you're actually doing it, and then being actively involved is definitely maybe a better way to make things more understandable, go more in depth, I think.
If I walked into a class knowing that almost every day we're going to be doing an in-class activity, and we're going to be quizzing, and there's going to be videos that are shown that only the teacher has, and it makes me want to come to class, because I am involved, because I do want to put my input instead of just sitting there listening and reading. It makes it a little bit more exciting.
Just reading, you only remember so many things, where once we're involved, I'm going to remember things that she said, I'm going to remember things that were brought up by other people, more when I hear it, when I see it, when there's something tangible that I can relate to in my life, where out of a textbook, it's all kind of hypothetical, and sometimes I can't connect what my relevance is to that.
It's very useful, because they're speaking from experience, and we're not just reading it off of a piece of paper where, Kellogg's did this. We were actually listening and watching this gentleman from Kellogg's talk about his experience and what they're trying to achieve and the future goals of the company. And that's something that, now that when I go to the grocery store, I'm going to look at Kellogg's and remember that video and what he said, right? So I think it just resonates a little bit more, especially from it being an industry professional.
Sometimes if I see it's the president of a company, there's some disconnect, as like I'm down here and they're up here, where's the relevance? Where if it's a little bit more realistic to us, somebody that's maybe new to the industry and can relate what they were at in our stage of life to what they're doing now, that
Mhm.
becomes a lot more relevant. Almost sometimes like maybe the person that is making those decisions before the person that approves them, and the person that goes through the ideas of that and how they refined that. Yeah, the process more. So I think for me personally, it's a lot of like the things I learn. It's because how do I see this affecting my future?
Okay.
So when I'm looking at somebody in that position, I'm almost deciding for myself what sort of positions are going to make sense for me. So when I hear what is involved in their job, then I'm first of all being exposed to what's out there, and second of all, I'm refining in my life what's going to make sense. If there's a part of their job that's the major part and that's something I don't like doing, that helps me refine where I want to focus and what's
Yeah.
important and what I'm going to retain.
Almost like-
We will be going through that, and they've just recently went through what we went through basically, but they've been through school and yeah, just bring it closer to you. Yeah, be more realistic for us. The exercise itself is like you're being actively involved, even if you're getting up and like just having a like peer discussion. It has a complete different outcome than just sitting there and reading or listening to lectures. You're more connected to it by doing.
But this is completely different. A lot of the times the content isn't there in some of the places where you go, or you have a video, you have a reading, you have an activity, and the fact that we actually had to get up and go out and get that information, bring it back and present it, it makes me, like I was like stressing out. Like I wanted to get as much information as I could because I didn't want to come empty-handed, you know what I mean? So it's gonna get somebody thinking, it's gonna get them active into the course and the content. And you know, now that I discussed with David a couple times, I discussed with the person downstairs that worked in the bookstore, like it sits with me, and it, because I was trying to absorb as much information as I could. But yeah, I love like all the different aspects to the online part of it too. And that's, for me, I'm not a very like high-tech gadget kind of person. I'm just getting into that, and I do want to learn more about it. So I feel confident going into this program and knowing how to navigate it. Once, obviously, the test trial at the start was a little rough, but once getting into it, it was very clear, laid out. I like how it tracked my progress. As soon as we finished that exam or that little quiz, it showed your mark on there and like what time, and like, you know, it'll show you how you're doing and where your weakness was, or so you can focus on that a little bit more. But yeah, the way that it was laid out was really organized, and I like it.
From D2L and then have it all in one place, because
Yeah.
it does, like even there was a couple times we had to discuss, wait, which one am I doing now, which one comes next, oh I have to go back to D2L to go back into
Yeah.
MyTap. So I think just to have almost like one access point and then have it all laid out there makes a lot more sense.
So the layout within MyTap
Yeah.
Is great.
is better than
than on
the layout.
D2L.
For instance, like
But you're-
I started on MindTap, and I just went from MindTap going down, and then David, you know, popped by and he's like, that's wrong, and Emily was filling it out on D2L and then going back, and you could see on D2L that it was being checkmarked every time you logged in to that from D2L, where if it was more organized within MindTap, it would be a little bit easier, like if there was a pre-class section and if there was, you know, all of these.
So if in pre-class, it just simply said, go to MindTap,
Yeah.
button here,
Mhm.
and find concept 4.1, exercise 2.
Yeah,
I
that
think
would be
even to
enough.
have
There was,
that
like,
title
instructions.
on MindTap, pre-class activities.
Yeah.
This is this, and then
Right.
in-class activities, like almost the same way that you have it on D2L,
Yeah.
but all just on MindTap.
So you don't have to have like a
I'll
link
explain
for
to you.
everything.
It's a
Yeah,
good
I'm
point.
not sure.
It's a good point, if it could be done.
Like you don't have to have a link for everything. You could have the link for like the pre-class MindTap. You click on it, but on D2L there's a list. Like say you said, go to activity 4.1, instead of having another link for activity 4.1 that you'd have to jump back and forth to. Maybe just having like a review at the start of class about what you should have done, because there's always going to be students that aren't going to do the pre-class stuff. So just reviewing that and having kind of more of like an open discussion instead of a lecture, a long lecture. opening it up to students where they can have their input if they did read it, or, you know, if they're just reading it, then they can kind of follow along. And yeah, I don't know.
I think one of the
Maybe
biggest
more
things
of
for
a
me from an
discussion.
instructor would be like consistency.
Yeah.
That what I'm getting online,
Yeah,
what I'm getting in the class, the questions I'm asking, even from teacher to teacher, it's consistent. Because I know in previous classes, we've learned one concept, and then the next semester with a different teacher, it's different. So I think to have something that really follows through and just continues to build, to have that consistency from our teachers and somebody that we can ask and it's not going to change. We're no longer learning to satisfy a teacher's need, because that's often kind of what we say is get through the class and do it the way the teacher wants,
Yeah.
rather than to actually do it the way that it should be structured or the way that we're intended to learn it.
And then instructor is basically there to guide you through giving you feedback and making sure that you're understanding the course material.
I think feedback's the
Feedback
real
is the
important word
biggest
there.
thing,
Yeah. Is that to know that we're on the right path,
Yeah.
to know that we have somebody that can tell us, you know, one way or another,
Yeah.
or to clarify the feedback is huge.
Because we've had instances in the past where, you know, we've had an activity and we thought we were on the right direction, and then we went to go ask a question and it ended up being, you know, totally reversed. So I think there is always going to be a need for teachers. There's always going to, if you're learning something, you're going to need somebody to clarify something along the way. You're
And-
not going to be able to completely do it on your own.
Just as your statement with depends the subject, I think it also really depends the student. You're going to have your students that are a lot more active in class. You're going to have the ones that want to build those relationships, and they really see that as a foundation for what you're building off of. So I think that some students are going to get more from having a teacher than others, where some might take it almost as more of an online kind of thing and guide themselves through it. Some people really like to do that socially, to do that with, like, I don't want to say having their hand held, but to have somebody there that they can always go to, they can always ask questions and ask advice from.
And I feel like if you guys are starting this off as just for marketing, I feel like that is going to be more beneficial, is to have, you know, the teacher that are having, there's going to be more students in the program wanting to discuss these things as you go further into the major.
And I think you feel also maybe more obligated when you are working on activities involved with other
Yeah.
people, because you don't want to just like let them do it and then you just benefit. So whereas when you're on your own just doing the readings, then it's different, because then you say, okay, maybe you want to postpone it, maybe you just want to procrastinate, maybe you just want to be ahead of reading. It's more of your preference. But when you're working in groups, I would want it to let you down, and I would hope
Yeah,
that you guys
exactly.
wouldn't let me down. So it's more of a give and take, and you want to be part of it.
And
Yeah,
if
I
you
think that
miss-
extends to the teacher too,
Yeah,
because
if
you
you miss
almost
one
want to take
class.
ownership to what you're doing. Like, we have a relationship with a lot of our teachers, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed and go to class, but I know I like that teacher. I know that they're
Mhm.
gonna be disappointed in me if I don't show up, and so
Yeah.
I'm almost showing up to yeah, to maintain that relationship. And I think that's important. Yeah.
It was that Friday, 8 o'clock class.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys
In
will be
reality
back here.
is that we're working 2 jobs. We've got school.
Yeah.
We'd love to make it all the time, but sometimes we just can't, because we were at work till 3 in the morning and classes at 8. And sometimes that reality, this gives us that opportunity to stay on track. Sometimes when we aren't able to always have that dream world of being here every class
Always
and
being
being
here, yeah.
active in it every class, you can kind of read this and interpret this. Okay, if I was there for that activity, I mean, even we spoke about this with ours, I have an idea of Starbucks, I have an idea of Tim Hortons. Sure, it helped to go to those places, but I could still get a lot from the concept of the activity without actually implementing it. So in those times that I can't be fully involved, it still gives a lot of opportunity to take away just as much.
Not right away.
Other than something that tracks progress, which is, I guess, more tangible than
Yeah.
Yeah,
bigger. But
which is in there, we just
Yeah.
didn't get. And while, you know, as a student, your MindTap access expires after a certain amount of time, your access to that ePortfolio page you'd still have access to
So
that.
is that something that you can integrate into LinkedIn and stuff in those sort of platforms?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could put a link from Pathbreak into LinkedIn. I mean, it's similar functionality. I think the thing with an e-portfolio like that is that you could make it more private. I mean, LinkedIn you can make private as well. Do you typically use LinkedIn?
I'm a
Where's-
LinkedIn user,
yeah.
yeah.
You use
It was
LinkedIn,
something
so-
that was kind of ingrained in us since
Okay.
my
Marketing,
first semester.
First semester.
Do you upload projects, or are you just uploading things like
Well, just-
skills? And
yeah.
Yeah, skills
more
and
skills.
enforcing other people's skills and that kind of thing, which I
Okay.
guess this would just be enforcing your own, but really having a tangible aspect of doing that.
Would you consider uploading things like, let's say you've done a presentation that you're particularly proud of, would you upload that to something like a
Yeah.
LinkedIn or an e-portfolio, or
I
would that
think-
feel?
I think if that
Definitely.
was an option to integrate the two, definitely.
You get that interview and you want to show them something you're really proud of and something that relates to the job that or the career that you're heading into. It's really nice that it's already organized and you're not going into your school stuff and you're trying to find it through everything where this is, everything that you've done is going to be right on here.
Because there are so many tools that you can actually use, whether it would be in the video or the concept maps, but it's just a lot of students don't know that it's accessible, or they think, okay, I have the book, and a lot of people don't want to pay maybe the code, but it's actually very helpful.
Yeah.
So if you were to see a video like that, would that prompt you kind of to purchase? Or the other thing that we do is we bring in people like Danny and Natasha right to your class. You've probably had day one presentations. Is that like
I think the latter more so. I tend to ignore the kind of
Yeah.
intro
The videos?
videos
Yeah.
and stuff
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
Well, and then you go in there and you try and figure it out on your own, and then
Yeah.
you kind of forget about the video after. But that's
Okay.
it. What she touched on was students actually using the online component, because I know that there's some classes that they're like, yep, you have to buy it all. Textbook comes with it. We're going to use it, and then we never end up using it. So that's another thing that should be a little bit more consistent and
Oh, you mean from an
upfront and,
instructor? Yeah.
Like there's been marketing classes where we do use everything online. We use the textbook, but then there are classes where we don't open the
I have
textbook
unopened
or
textbooks.
yeah.
That I
And
hate.
that's a common frustration in the student population for sure.
We hear that a lot, that it's very frustrating to have to purchase something that isn't being used.
Yeah.
So I hear you.
And lastly, I think we have a lot of platforms that we kind of have to use for different classes. So I think the less that you have to jump between D2L and MindTap and this and that, the better. Like the more that we can just go one place and have as much as possible, is really nice. Because I know like with other classes we have to sign in and have so many different
Or
accounts
even-
and stuff going on that
yeah.
it's nice just to have everything in one easily accessible place.
Or even, because I know that there's some programs that don't actually go off of MindTap and they have their own other programs, even in D2L, if there's a link to it. Because I know sometimes, like, if I'm logging into the Pearson one, it'll direct me to there's like 2 or 3 different ones in there,
Yeah.
and you're jumping around trying to find it while you're falling a little bit behind if you're following it in class.
If you're logged into D2L, let us log
Yeah.
right into MindTap.
Yeah.
Like integrate the two.
It
so
would be
far.
really helpful if there was always like a link under the course to whatever online component that you're supposed to be using.
Okay. Dave, do you have any?
So, why a move to a digital format? Well, if you take a look around the classroom, that's where your students are. If you ask them any questions, they're not looking it up in a textbook unless you push them to that textbook. They're resistant to traditional textbooks because they're quickly dated. They're not updated as quickly as we'd like to see them be updated. They also can be very expensive for the student. For something that often will only be a temporary purchase, something we may not keep and take home. I can't think of too many textbooks I have from my at least academic past. My current textbook list is pretty large. The other thing with textbooks is that they don't engage. They're not asking questions. They're not waiting for answers, and this all happens in a digital format. So where did my interest in microlearning come from? I was in a classroom noticing about 4 or 5 years ago when I was teaching that there was a lot more cell phones in class and mobile phones, and this was a digital distraction. And there was a constant battle of having the students to refocus on what I was teaching because they were busy watching Facebook or other things of distraction. And I said, well, I don't think I want to fight this anymore. I think I might want to engage with this. So I thought, well, how can I get away from digital distraction? So the next thing I did, I thought about, well, what do students like to see? What do they like doing? And I was looking at the marketplace, which things tend to trend first, and found that there was a huge uptick in publishing in graphic novels. Actually, the only place where publishing was growing. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. I said, students seem to be engaged with this graphic format. So I took a little closer look into that and did some research around it, created a digital comic book with some embedded learning in it. And that kind of came into understanding that, yes, they engaged in it, that's great, but it was too long and it was an arduous process and really hard to repeat and probably very expensive to do on a long-term basis. I said, well, how can I take the essence of that and break that down into smaller bits? Because with the digital distraction, I also found I had a limited amount of time in which I could give information to students. I no longer had them locked in a classroom with just the windows to stare at. They had a lot of other things they could do instead of talking to me or listening to me, even worse. So I moved to doing some research around storytelling, and I've read into some pretty influential people in that market, a guy named Gar Reynolds, another person named Nancy Duarte, that do presentations for trade or for businesses. And I said, well, how can I incorporate that into education? And I found a link to that. There was storytelling, but the stories were short, unlike this one. The story was very short, and the stories quickly got to the information, but in an entertaining and hopefully memorable way. I always look at it this way, it's like, people remember things in story. When I ask you, Superman is faster than what? The answer most people will come up with is a speeding bullet. It's embedded in the story. So this is something I wanted to be able to take into the classroom, and then I created these series of presentations for Nelson to show how it could be used in the classroom in a very innovative and different way, and challenging teachers out there to take a look at the way they do presentations and try to not get stuck into dated context, but to maybe embed your teaching in a story that the students can remember. Well, I would hope that teachers that are kind of been brought up in a more traditional way of teaching with longer lectures would understand or see in their classroom that they are having students who are starting to get distracted. Their attention span aren't as long, and the time they spend trying to regroup the classroom to get back into the whatever subject matter of study is important, they could actually spend by breaking up their presentations. I mean, micro-learning is not necessarily a graphic approach to it. It's breaking down information to smaller, more digestible chunks. And if they can just look at these pieces and these presentations as a digestible chunk that prepares them for deeper learning, which is embedded also in these, is going to be really exciting, because all of a sudden the students will be able to understand that concept and hopefully immediately apply it, whether it's to their homework or in-class participation or activity. I think change is hard. I think change is going to be difficult. I think people are going to see some of these pieces and wonder if that will be something they can easily implement into their classroom. We've tried, or I've tried with the help of Nelson, to make sure that these pieces in these presentations stand alone, that they are pieces that can be used in the classroom if they decide not to use every aspect of MindTap for marketing. But I also see it's a complement because it is a smaller piece. Most pieces in MindTap for marketing are not long, arduous processes. And I'll use case studies by famous universities in the United States, which are excellent learning tools, but they have much more of a longer time commitment, and it might be addressing a different student profile too. These micro-learning presentations were designed to make it very easy for a teacher to cover a concept within the classroom as well as outside of the classroom. For in the classroom, it would be a story-driven concept. For example, if you look at one of the presentations is about a student named Letitia. Students will relate very much to another student. This Letitia is lost in her studies, and she's getting hungry, and she wants a chocolate chip cookie. not a lot to do with marketing, except for the fact now we're talking about needs and wants and unmet needs and wants. So it's a nice introduction to that. So the story follows Letitia as she searches for a cookie and finds Chef Pablo, and Chef Pablo makes these wonderful cookies. And then we take Chef Pablo's perspective of how he offers value. And value is an important concept in marketing because people buy value. That trade-off between the benefits and the cost of the product. So we share all that information through diagrams and mostly illustrations. The stories are short. They last, if you go through the storyline and the narrative is provided for you, probably 4 minutes, maybe 5. If you extend with the activities, you're looking more at a 15, 20-minute piece, and if you go into probing questions, you probably could do a whole lecture in 45 minutes on one concept. So it really gives you kind of all the pieces you need to kind of throw together a lesson plan, except for the assessment component, which you can use MindTap for marketing for, or your own pieces. So my advice to why you might want to consider MindTap for marketing is that it breaks away from the traditional way of learning. And if you look around the classroom, students are really spending their time in the digital world. That's where they spend probably most of their time. And you don't have to look very far into much research to know that. MindTap for marketing takes advantage of that. It's where the students are. Textbooks are arduous, they're heavy, and they're quickly dated, and they're relatively expensive for the student, and I'm sure you'll hear students talk about that. MindTap engages them, and it persuades them to keep at it, to make sure they get through the material. So I'm hoping that people consider this new way. New is difficult, we understand that, but understand that we're trying to address our audience needs, not our needs, but we want to make sure as a teacher that we have the skills in order to use these tools effectively. And I think MindTap for marketing has done a pretty good job.